Today, we need to talk about a story that, well, it really forces you to look at the kinds of pressures that can build up behind closed doors. It's a story that asks a pretty tough question. What actually happens when a person is pushed way, way past their breaking point? Just let that sink in for a second. That's the headline at the very heart of the Susan Avalon case, and it just stops you in your tracks, right? Not just because of the violence, but because it sounds so methodical, and because of the complicated, twisted history wrapped up inside it. And that right there is the big question we're going to dig into. How does a connection that's supposed to be about love and partnership and a future together, how does it curdle into something so final and so incredibly violent? This isn't just about one specific case. It's about trying to understand the human psychology behind an absolute tragedy. Okay, so to even begin to answer that, we have to start with the case itself. Let's take a look at the central figure, Susan Avalon, and the events of that one single devastating day. So this is Susan Avalon. She was 51 years old. And what's really striking, which just jumps out at you, is how people described her as having a totally ordinary life. But, as the source material shows, just under that surface was this long history that was just simmering with broken promises and arguments that never ever got resolved. It's a chilling reminder that some of the most extraordinary events can come from seemingly ordinary lives. And this wasn't some chaotic, heat-of-the-moment outburst. The timeline that the authorities laid out suggests a plan, a calculated one. A killing in the morning in one city, and then hours later, another one in a completely different city. That detail is absolutely crucial. It points to deliberation, not just a momentary loss of control. Two victims, and the connection between them, that's the key. These weren't strangers. They were both her ex-husbands. Two relationships that had already ended were brought to this final, violent close on the exact same day. An act like this is like throwing a huge rock into a still pond. The initial splash is tragic, of course, but the ripples, they just keep spreading wider and wider, touching lives that weren't even there. This is that ripple effect. So while the direct victims are, of course, at the center of the tragedy, the impact just devastates entire networks of people. I mean, look at this. Families are completely shattered. Children have to somehow make sense of the story about their parents, and whole communities are left feeling like their sense of trust and safety is broken. The violence doesn't just stop when the act is over. And this gets to a really fundamental misunderstanding that a lot of us have about where danger comes from. We're all taught to fear the stranger in the dark alley, right? But the reality, and this case just hammers it home, is that danger is so often much, much closer. It's in our kitchens, it's in our living rooms, and it's carried out by people we know, people we've loved, and people we've trusted. So if the danger is often that close, were there warning signs? Did anyone see this coming? Well, experts say yes, almost always. But the problem is that these alarms are often kind of quiet, they're misunderstood, or they're just dismissed entirely until it's way too late. Yeah, and these warning signs aren't always big, flashing neon lights. It could be something like escalating control that's disguised as just simple concern, or a past incident of violence that gets brushed off as, oh, it wasn't that bad, or it was a one-time thing. Or that kind of retaliatory talk, that feeling of they won't get away with this. These are the subtle but absolutely critical signals that pressure is building to a really dangerous level. Okay, so this brings us to the core theory from the source material, a framework that actually helps explain how someone like Susan Avalon might have reached that kind of breaking point. It's a concept called a compounded ending. So what is a compounded ending? Well, it's not one single thing. It's the dangerous pileup of endings. Think of it like someone stacking heavy weights, one by one on a very fragile sheet of glass. A breakup, then losing a job, a custody battle, social isolation. Each one adds more and more pressure. And this is pretty much what it can look like. A relationship ends, which is tough enough. Then, boom, financial stress from a job loss. Then you add on top of that some kind of major social pressure, like a public and nasty custody battle. And finally, you wrap that all up in isolation, where there's no support system to help carry any of that weight. For Susan Avalon, a life that was marked by all those broken promises we talked about, it probably had a lot of these elements, all stacking up silently over time. This is the architecture of a crisis, a perfect storm that from the outside nobody sees coming. So, beyond all the courtroom drama and the legal stuff, the Susan Avalon case leaves us with something much more personal. It leaves us with a lesson and a really heavy question that we all need to carry forward with us. But before we get to that final question, it's so important to remember this. For the families left behind in all of this, there's no happy ending. Justice isn't some moment of joy or celebration. It's a quiet, heavy necessity. It's just a way to formally close a chapter that, for them, will never, ever truly be over. And that brings us to the final, really tough question. Look around you. Think about your friends, your family, your coworkers. Who in your world might be silently stacking up these endings right now? Who do you know that's going through a breakup and a job loss and is starting to pull away from everybody? And that leaves us with this final, urgent thought. This isn't just some story to listen to and forget. It's a call to awareness. What would it actually take for us, as a community, as friends, to notice the architecture of a crisis building and to reach out before the unthinkable happens, before the headline writes itself?